This was a quote that's actually from Star Trek Discovery, which is the newest Star Trek that's on CBS. And they basically, this idea of we get to reach for the best in ourselves, and that is something that is really unique to Star Trek. Star Trek is one of the only futuristic shows that starts out as a utopia and tries to remain in a utopia. You could make the thesis that the whole part of the show is how do we maintain this really cool society we've built? And so that's kind of the thing that I thought was really interesting. The mirror universe comes in because we get to kind of see the what ifs. The first what if that we see is from 1967. The episode is called Mirror, Mirror, and a transporter accident takes Scotty, Bones, Uhura, and Kirk to the mirror universe. In this universe, instead of this federation, which is this utopian society where everybody gets along, it's this totalitarian, very Nazi-ish kind of society where, and I mean, when I say Nazi-ish, they do the salute and everything. And actually at one point, he goes, there's a security officer on the bridge, like a modern day Gestapo. What's hilarious is that there's a security officer on the bridge for every other Trek after this. So, so I got a kick out of that. Gene Roddenberry actually had a rule, they called it the Roddenberry box, that said that you could not have two characters that were in Starfleet ever have a conflict with each other. They always had to be friends, they always had to get along. And so that became it became kind of difficult to tell stories after a while. Mirror, Mirror let you see what would happen in a bad future. One of the things that Roddenberry wanted was he wanted to have people who were from different ethnicities, different racial backgrounds, different nationalities. This is during the Cold War and during the Vietnam War, and so they have a Russian and a Japanese person on the bridge serving as bridge officers. And it's really crazy in the mirror universe. They are the most savage and the most violent characters. So there's some undercurrents. Also, you'll note that Uhura is in a bikini. That is not her normal uniform in the regular universe. Sex and sexuality is a huge part of the parallel universe. You can tell that this is definitely the 60s because overtly sexy women are definitely the evil ones in these parallel universes. We don't really see another parallel universe, and at the end, Kirk is about to beam back, and he gives this speech to Spock, and Spock is the evil Spock who has a beard, and that's how you know he's evil. He's got a goatee. As a matter of fact, there's an indie band called Spock's Beard, which I think is hilarious. But in the end, he gives this speech that basically says that the Empire is illogical because it's evil, and he's the only one that seems to be sympathetic. Roddenberry seems to be saying that science and logic will help us overcome our problems, not emotion. The next series we see, and I'm sorry, that's a very dark picture, is Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine was after Roddenberry's death, and so they've kind of ditched the Roddenberry box so they can actually have people having conflict. Talking about doppelgangers, this is the place where we have very personal conflicts. So Kira Nerys, who is a freedom fighter, and now she's a military officer, she was the Cardassians, which is one of the alien races, called her a terrorist. Now she's part of the legitimate military, and she's always really wrestling with, was I a bad person during this occupation? Did I do bad things? Was what I did wrong? When she goes to the mirror universe, she meets the Intendant, who is this kind of S&M, maniacally crazy version of herself who kills people because it's funny. You know, and so she's really, really violent and kind of, it's really interesting. It's very much nature over nurture. What would we be like in a bad universe? Which I thought was kind of interesting. And there's another quote there that basically talks about the idea of maybe if history would have turned out a little bit different. And that's kind of the whole purpose of these crossovers. And they have these crossover episodes almost once a season for the rest of the show. There's another episode that is missing from here, which is called Through a Mirror Darkly, which is at Star Trek Enterprise. Star Trek Enterprise was a short-lived show, but that really doubled down on the idea of the Terran Empire as very racist. Their job was to eliminate all the alien races, and you can kind of see how this is going with the times. In the 1960s, we were afraid of World War II happening again. In the 2000s, it was all about freedom fighting and establishing freedom around the world, and you know, think about like the Iraq War and all that kind of stuff. And then during Enterprise, we're really having this dawn of talking about race and having this discussion about race and injustice. That is continued in Star Trek Discovery. Star Trek Discovery is the new show on CBS, and they have the Terran Empire. One of the things that was interesting about Enterprise is that the 2 episodes that they have are actually from the bad guy's point of view. It takes place in that universe. And so we actually feel like kind of sympathetic because they're our main characters. This is another episode where the whole crew goes into the mirror universe, and we find out that the Terran Empire is this really scary, maniacal thing. And Philippa Giorgio, who is the Empress in this universe, is one of the characters that actually ends up coming back over once they get past, like they're able to masquerade as these bad people and they get back over. And she is the Terran Empress. She's supposed to be pure evil. But we find out as we get to know her that she cares very deeply for one of the main characters. She loves this person. And she actually ends up coming over to the main universe and is now a reoccurring character. This is my favorite thing that kind of shows you the clash between the morality. They're trying to figure out how to power this science doodad, honestly, no one really cares, in order to achieve this science-y goal. And she's like, oh, well, you need a big blow up of energy. Just chuck a bomb into a star. It'll go nova, and now we have energy. And he's like, well, wait, that would destroy all life within dozens of light years. She goes, yeah. Michael goes, we're not doing that. And she goes, I thought there were no bad ideas. This whole idea that, like, you know, what is but they end up going along with some of her other ideas. So at what point is there a utilitarianism there? And so Star Trek is one of those things I think is really, really fascinating for what it tells us both about the stories that we're telling, but how that mirror universe can be used to answer questions and to talk about ourselves and the societal issues and kind of social justice issues and stuff as we go through. So that's what I had to say.
So first question I wanted to talk a little bit about is why are stories about time warps and time travel so common? So there are a bunch of myths, and I think Tim's going to talk about one of them. I just want to mention this is a super common theme in like the Joseph Campbell sense, especially if you think about like Egyptian mythology, where you have this cycle where you have Ra, who represents, you know, the living pharaoh, and you have Osiris, who represents the dead pharaoh, and every pharaoh goes through both of those over and over and over again, sustaining, you know. So like, why are we so focused on time warps and those cycles?
Well, I came up with three possibilities in terms of like, and you know, one would, I guess, I don't know if they've ever like done a survey to say, are you really into these shows, or is it just like they do one every once in a while and you're like, well, that's part of the season, so I guess I'll watch it. But I think there a lot of times there's this feeling of cleverness or whatever, because it's usually just one person who's aware that they're going through this. So it's sort of like we're following around this one. They have a secret, and we know the viewers are in on the secret, and we're kind of like, and I'm almost like with Triangle, I'm like, tell other people about this.
It makes us feel smart.
It's like, come on, yeah. Like you kind of think, what would I do in that scenario? You know, is there really? Yeah, it makes us feel smart. I think we could. Second thing is it's a puzzle kind of narrative usually. So sometimes it's a sci-fi kind of puzzle that needs to be solved. Again, with a classic Star Trek episode, Cause and Effect. They're aware they're going through a loop, but so there's no real lesson to learn. There's just like, how can we actually, should we go left, should we go right? It's some space anomaly they have to avoid or whatnot. So I think I'm just personally intrigued by the whole, you know, solving a problem in some sci-fi stories. But I think the biggest sort of emotional thing is this notion of that we all might feel often like we're in a rut of some sort. Bill Murray in the Groundhog Day, he has this quote. He's talking to these guys in a bowling alley, and they're just like doing shots or whatever. And he goes, what would you do if you were stuck in one place and every day was exactly the same and nothing that you did mattered? And the one dude does a shot, and the other dude says, that about sums it up for me. So maybe we too feel like we're just doing the same thing over and over, and it's sort of then this question. These stories maybe give us hope that someday we'll break out of it.
Sure.
Well, and I think that I think we love a what if, because I think we all feel like once we make a choice, we always kind of wonder. I always think about the Robert Frost poem, "The Two Roads Diverged in Yellowwood" kind of thing. Like, if we, you know, what would have happened if we would have gone left instead of right? There's actually a Doctor Who episode called "Turn Left," which is all about that. But there's this idea of we love a what if story. We like to see how the world would have been different if something happened. Also, from a purely meta production standpoint, you can take the same actors, the same general sets, do some things to them, and add something that's different. Because when you've got 7 seasons of a show, there's only, you got to keep it fresh, and Time Warp episodes can do that. But I think the idea of, there's an episode called Tapestry of Star Trek where Jean-Luc Picard is given the opportunity to go back and correct his mistakes. And it turns out that when he corrected his mistakes, spoiler alert, but it's a 20-year-old show, so that his life was really boring and pretty awful if he hadn't made these terrible mistakes. And so I think we love a what-if narrative, and we like to find out what would have happened, but then we also like to be reassured that what we decided to choose was actually okay. So.
Yeah. So next question is, what about the origins of time loop within the plot? What are the mechanics? So this is actually a diagram of, my little laser pointer doesn't work. The top left, it's showing kind of what happens in Groundhog Day and in Back to the Future. And if this had Lost, which it's a TV show that J.J. Abrams did before all the Star Wars movies.
What's the one after Back to the Future?
Yeah.
What's that
It's
one?
supposed to be Primer, I think.
Oh,
for some reason it didn't. The name didn't show up there.
Didn't show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, Joe?
What do I think about the
Yeah.
origins?
That was
So like I said, I think there's the moral and ethical thing, and I think some of it is just philosophical, like you all are talking about. But I keep going back to our foundational stories. Like Tim and I were talking yesterday about the myth of Sisyphus, about this guy. Do you all know this? He gets punished by the gods, and so he has to push this giant ball or boulder up a hill. And at the end of the day, every day it just rolls back down. He has to go back down and push it up again.
It's like grading.
It's never over.
You finish one set.
And then there's Prometheus, who gets punished by having his liver eaten out every day, which is kind of and then he regenerates, and it's it does make us kind of think about the way that our lives are set up and how we can actually disrupt them, and how it would be different. It lets us kind of have that in sort of
What was the pivotal moment?
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting because going to the Star Trek narratives, Kirk is kind of a bull in a china shop. He'll go backward, forward in time. He'll just screw things up, and they actually make fun of that in
He's
DS9.
he doesn't care.
He really doesn't care. Well, he pontificates because that's what a Star Trek captain does. Is they make these high and lofty speeches. It's actually part of their job requirement. He makes the speech to Spock, and he's like, "Dude, make the world a better place." And Spock's like, "That's a great idea." Becomes emperor, makes the world a better place. They are quickly taken over by the Alliance, which are the Cardassians and the Klingons, which you could say are the embodiments of order and violence, which are kind of interesting. Because Roddenberry said, well, if the Federation can't be nice, well, then we're going to basically take all the human flaws and make them individual aliens. So, that's a panel for another day. But he's like, you know what? I'm going to make the world a better place. I'm going to make people equal. I'm going to go into egalitarian values. And he is quickly conquered by another regime. And it really shows the consequence. And Terrans end up being enslaved. The humans end up being enslaved, and that's what you see in DS9. So it's really interesting to look at what are those pivotal individual moments. And when you've got a franchise that goes from the 60s to today, if they manage to stay in continuity, which you can kind of see how they've decided to talk about the consequences of the actions of these other characters going back and forth, which is kind of neat. So the fact that our causality is collective, that it's not one individual, but that it's everybody, it's kind of neat.
Did you have my
I think I do, yes.
I just wanted to point out, Supernatural,
Bless
always
him.
got to mention it, but so there's the question, just to get to the whole, again, the mechanics question. With Groundhog Day, I just feel like, first of all, I think it's funny when people, when they talk about them, when they say something's a Groundhog Day story or whatever, there's a story about that weird holiday. But again, if you see the movie, then you know what they're talking about. But just the weirdness of it is just no explanation, just happens. Same way with the first Happy Death Day movie, but in Supernatural they have a time loop episode, and it's just magic. It's magic. It's a trickster figure. So you don't need any more explanation than that.
Oh yeah, I remember that episode now. But honestly, could the whole series of Supernatural be considered that? Because
it's all
the season happens,
magic,
one of them dies, goes to heaven or hell, and then the
right.
next season they get him, and it happens again with
And the
a different
funny
brother.
thing is, the lesson they were trying, the trickster was trying to teach them in the episode. In the episode, Dean keeps dying over and over again, and Sam keeps trying to save him over to go. And the trickster's lesson is supposed to be, you gotta let go sometimes. And they never learn to let go. They've died and come back to life so many times. So I mentioned Happy Death Day. They created this this in the second movie they created a sci-fi reason. They came up with something interesting. They mentioned Sisyphus is mentioned in like 3 of these movies. The sort of feudal figure, Sisyphus quantum cooling reactor, and they just call it Sissy for short.